Welcome to the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm your host, Robin L. Owens, PhD, and this is where we dive in each week to give advice, tools, and tips for high-achieving, purpose-minded women who've written nonfiction books and want to amplify their message beyond the book. I'm a college professor, and when I'm not doing that, I am speaking, coaching, mentoring, and teaching high-achieving women who have written books how to use their books to make a bigger difference, have more impact, and purpose. Okay, let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm so glad you're here and listening into the podcast. I appreciate you for taking time out of your busy day, night, week to listen into the podcast. Really appreciate you. And today I'm talking with none other than Jacqueline Wales. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Jacqueline. She's the author of the books, The Fearless Factor and The Fearless Factor at Work. In addition to being an author, she's a keynote speaker and trusted advisor to successful, high-achieving women. And let me tell you a little story about Jacqueline. At only 16 years old, she fled from her childhood home in a desperate search for happiness. Looking in all the wrong places, she left a trail of abandoned children and a pattern of self-abuse that threatened her life. But that's just the beginning of her story. From London, from Scotland to England, from California to Paris, Amsterdam, New York, and Bali, Jacqueline's life has been a journey of self-discovery, awakening, and joy in the face of fear. So pay attention to that word fear, because Jacqueline believes that being fearless is not the absence of fear, but it's the courage to take the next step. And she is an unwavering champion for being fearless, which is why we're going to be talking to her here today. Welcome, Jacqueline Wales.
It's a pleasure to be here, Robin. Thank you so much. And I love your voice. It is very soothing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That means a lot to me, especially from someone like you who has a nice, strong radio voice that I really appreciate. All right, so let's just jump right in. I read your a little bit of your story in your bio, but why don't you tell us in your own words, first a little bit about you and then the work you do.
So I'm often asked, why fear? And I start with my early upbringing, which was poverty, working class Scotland, and alcoholic father, violent, and having to learn at a very early age how to run and hide. And I like to say I've been an astute observer of human behavior from the get-go, because you had to watch for the signs of what was going to happen next. And it builds tremendous amount of strength and character into you, by the way. But there was a lot of low self-esteem in my story, and a lot of sense of I would never be good enough, because that's what I was told. The expectation was that I would stay in my working class background and I would get married, have kids, and that would be the end of my life, basically. But I left home at 16 because I was absolutely fed up with what I was dealing with. And I had a lot of drugs and alcohol problems at the time. And I went off to London. Now, arriving in London at the age of 17, not knowing anybody, not having anywhere to live, and having a boyfriend who in the very first 24 hours pointed out that he was in charge and I wasn't going to have any of it. Left me kind of, alone and abandoned. I ended up getting pregnant by the time I was 19, and I gave my child up for adoption when I was 20, after having her for 3 months, even though I was supposed to give her up at birth, could not. So 3 months I gave her up for adoption, and then proceeded to marry the first person who said, I love you, and have another child with him. And then I walked out on both of them when the child was 3.5 years old, and I left for San Francisco. I've spent the early part of my life, the first 28 years, just kind of trying to figure out what it is I really wanted out of life, and I'm not doing well at it. As I say, a lot of drugs and a lot of alcohol, a lot of deep messing up, self-sabotage, you name it, I got it all. It wasn't until I was in my 30s. And by then I've already met my husband, who I've now been with for 43 years. And I got pregnant for the third time. And I said she would leave me before I left her. And that meant she'd go to college and I would have to figure out my shit. And that was really what it came down to. So fear was very, very evident for me on so many levels. I mean, you can imagine when you decide to go off to a foreign country or a foreign city and you know nothing and nobody, and you got no way of earning a living, you better go figure that out real fast. And inevitably I did. I mean, one thing I'm very proud of is that you could put me in the middle of anywhere and I'll go figure it out. You know, I don't sit around waiting for people to come to me. I go to them. And that's been a big theme in my lifetime. So, you know, there we are at the age of 35, trying to get our life together. I started going to AA and realized it wasn't about the drinking, it was about the thinking, because I really thought I had a problem with it. And then in my 40s was when I really started to flourish. And at that point, I'd had 3 more children in my life. The first one, as I said, at the age of, or the third one at 35. Then I had a stepdaughter who came from Thailand, a complete stranger, and had to figure that one out. And she was almost 10 years old. And then I had a third child with my current husband. So there's 5 children in my life, and they've all got different stories on me as a mother. And I think the driving force for me on so many levels was motherhood. How can I be a better mother to these children? And I'm really grateful to be able to say at this point in time, I have great relationships with everyone, not the adopted daughter, but the other 4. We're pretty good at this point, including my son that I left when he was 3.5. And now he's 48 and I talk to him every weekend. Oh. And I have 2 granddaughters, and one of them is his. And it's you know, it is what it is. And in the space of 1 generation, I have changed the entire family dynamics. It's been a journey. So, and it has informed everything. So, you know, learning how to write was a big one. I started writing when I was in my 40s. I became a professionally trained singer in my 40s. I took up martial arts in my 40s. I traveled the globe in my 40s and dragged our 2 kids around with me through these various cities that you mentioned earlier, and around the world. And so it's been quite remarkable, you know, the journey that I've taken. And so fear became the big driver of, you know, my success. And that's why I talk about, why does fear matter to your success? Because when that fear alarm goes off in your body, you have to pay attention to it. It's all about the stories we tell ourselves. Now, you know, you got me going on a roll here. So, you know, anytime you feel like you want to stop me, please do, because I got plenty of story.
Okay. And I want to make a note of that last thing you said about why fear matters to your success. I'm making myself a mental note as I say that out loud, but let's go back to your story a little bit. And first, let me thank you for sharing that deep, heartfelt, and deeply personal story. For the sake of the transformation of others, I appreciate your courage and strength to share that so we can all grow together, because I imagine that didn't come easy to be able to share your story in the way that you just did. So
well, thank you for that. I do talk about, you know, at this stage of my life, I'm now in my 70s. So I've got several decades of figuring stuff out. And to me, a lot of it is just a story at this point. The emotional charge of that story, there might be some of it still lingering, but the truth of the matter is, when we hold on to our stories as being, you know, this is the defining things of our lives, the truth of the matter is that we have to learn to let go of it at some point and be present to where you are now. Because it's only by being present to where you are now can you truly build a future that you want to go towards.
Yes.
That's a really important piece. And it doesn't mean there's no fear in that, because it's still there. Whenever you make the big leap, you're still in that, oh, can I really do this? Am I capable? Am I smart enough? Am I, whatever the thing is, am I worthy of it? Do I deserve it? You know, these are all the areas that we get into our own heads around the fear issues. And I have learned how to manage that in my own life, but it hasn't been easy. And I like to say that with all my clients, no matter what they bring to me, I've got a story to match it. It's just that simple. You know, I was given this gift from God or whatever to be able to live through all these experiences so that I can now empathize with others, and primarily women who are struggling with the same types of issues.
Yes. Yes. And you mentioned in your story that at age 40, you learned to write. Is that when you wrote your first book? Is that what marks that moment of your learning to write?
Yeah, I took some courses. You're in Los Angeles. I took some courses at UCLA in the writers program. And it was really an eye-opener for me, because the first class I took, the woman said to me, the teacher said to me, she said, "You've written before." And I was like, no. And she said, "I can't believe it. I wrote a short story." And it was an interior story from the point of view of a man who was trapped in his body, but he couldn't express it out into the world. And he was in a hospital. And they call it locked-in syndrome or something of that nature. I wrote a story about his experience and what he was hearing and seeing in the outside of the room. And I remember that story really, really well. And I remember her calling me up at home. And at the time I was living in LA, as I said earlier. And she said, "The power of this story, I can't believe this is your first story." I was like, my imagination, I have a good one.
Yeah, your gift began to reveal itself.
Exactly. And then when I decided to write my early life story, it became my novel When the Crow Sings, which was written about 3 generations of women in Scotland giving birth to children outside of marriage, and how it spills over from generation to generation until one woman has the courage to give her child up for adoption. And I told the story of my grandmother in fictional form because I didn't have enough information. And then I told my mother's story, and then I told my story. But I wrote it all as a semi-autobiographical book. But it was a lot of evolution to get to the heart and the core of these characters. And I wrote it in Scottish transliteration so that people could get the flavor of these people. Publishers came to me and said, "Well, you know, nobody wants to read the transliteration." And I was like, "Well, that's bullshit. How many Irish writers do you know that are famous that write about the Irish experience? This is the Scottish experience." And someone said it was the Angela's Ashes for Scotland, is how it was described, which was really cool. But as I said, it was a long evolution. It was 12 years before I actually published that book.
Makes sense. Yeah. So now tell us about the fearless factor. Tell us the premise of the book.
So the premise of the book is that we all have fear, and we allow the fear to be manifest in the stories that we tell ourselves, because fear is primarily imagination based. We are rarely physically threatened. I mean, I was physically threatened as a child, but you know, there's a lot of stories around that one. But to most people, it's the stories we tell ourselves. And that's what creates the fear of not being good enough, the fear of not being lovable, the fear of not being worthy or deserving, the fear of not having enough. You know, that there's an endless run of things that we can be afraid of. But until we have empirical evidence, it's stuff you made up. And the stuff you made up is built on your negative experiences, your negative thinking, the ways in which you've been conditioned throughout your life, either by the early authority figures of your life or even by the people you've worked for. But there's a sense that somehow you're not measuring up. And it doesn't matter how far you've gotten in your career, there's still that lingering piece. I'm really against putting labels on things, but people talk about the imposter syndrome. I like to say, let's take that label away and call it what it is: self-doubt. Pure and simple. That's all it is self-doubt. And where did that self-doubt start? And that's what I want to get to the root of, is where did that messaging begin in your life? Because somebody somewhere planted it. It wasn't the first thing that you noticed. Because as children, we're innocent. We get up and we do our lives. And it's the imprint of others that creates fear in our life. And I was raised with a lot of people with fear in their life for many obvious reasons, poverty being one of them.
Mhm.
But at the same time, are you a victim, or are you, I like to put it another way. Are you the author of your own life, or are you living in someone else's epic novel?
Yes. So tell us about in the fearless factor. I mean, you told us some things about the physical fear you had growing up and some others, but how would you say the fearless factor as a book reflects a part of who you are?
There's a lot of my own personal story in there. One of the things you noted earlier, and it's something that I feel very strongly about, is I need to share my story so that others can share theirs. And I invited 12 women to share their stories in the Fearless Factor, to talk about how they had discovered their being fearless. And as I say, it's not the absence of fear, but it's the courage to take the next step, because that's where we find the opportunities.
Yes. Yes. I'm so glad to hear you say that, because this podcast, many of the listeners are what I call high achieving women who are authors. They've written books, but they wear many hats. They're business owners, consultants, do a variety of things, and they've written books, and they have this author role as a part of their work. They've written nonfiction books, and they want to make a difference with those books. So now, given that description, what's something you could share from your expertise, experience, life, that would share some support to the woman I just described? This is a person that is usually ambitious, like I mentioned, high achieving, responsible, doing all the things. So people don't typically see that they need support because they're supporting everyone else.
That's right. Yeah.
So what could you say to the person?
There's two things going on there. One of the things that I hear a lot over the years I've been doing this, and I've been doing this now about 18 years, the fear of failure is a big one. And when we really get into failure, we look at the fact that, as I like to say, we're all failing our way to success, because that's the lessons that we've learned. But here's what failure is, simply put. It's a choice, a decision, or an expectation that did not go the way that you had planned. Period.
Oh, say that again.
So failure is this. It's a choice, a decision, or an expectation that did not go the way you had planned. Period.
That's it.
That's it. There's nothing more to say about it.
Okay, there's no more to say about it, but let's just say a little more about it.
We get obsessed with this idea that, we can make a mistake as a high achiever, and I certainly am one, you're one. We have these perfectionist standards about, we got to get it right. We got to prove ourselves. We've got to, we got to hide whatever it is we're feeling, because otherwise they're going to think we're weak, or we just don't have the goods, and there's that self-doubt creeps in, it's like, really, am I capable? Can I do this? I talked to a CMO recently. I was invited into a company to speak to them about fear and how we manage fear. And she had just been promoted into her role about 9 months previously. And she was having a hard time claiming ownership of that role, even though she had worked in high levels, SVP, so on and so forth, for years, highly respected. But when she was brought in to be the second person under the CEO, she was like, why am I here? Until the CEO pointed out that she was invited to the table. And if she came to his house and didn't eat dinner, would you think he would be offended? And she said, yes. And he said, well, that's what happens when you sit at the table and you don't have anything to say. So that was an interesting story to hear when we were in the conversation. It was a fireside chat. And I looked at her and I said, so, where's the belief system here? What's really going on? And it's that piece we constantly fight with. Am I good enough?
Yeah.
And as women, especially as high achieving women, we have such a high barrier to get past, because let's face it, we're still dealing with the male hierarchy, and they still have their thoughts about where we belong and whether they believe we still belong in the kitchen or with the kids. it's an imprint, and it might still be lingering in there, even although they know better. But there's still that barrier that we must fight against, and we're always having to prove ourselves more than our male counterparts, and that causes the self-doubt too.
Yes.
And that's another piece where I go, basically, F you, and show who you are. So one of the things I talk about with my clients is, and what I help them with, is how to take greater ownership and authority in their roles.
Yes.
Or excuses.
Yes.
There is no excuse for you not showing up. But here's the other thing we need: more women leaders who are truly invested in, I'm going to speak up no matter what. You might not like it. You might not agree with me, but I'm willing to put it out there and test the waters. Again, the fear of failure is going to show up. It's like, well, what are they going to do? I'm going to be judged. I'm going to be criticized. I'm going to be rejected. I'm going to be humiliated. These are all fears that we invest ourselves in. And how can we do that differently? And I'm encouraging you to be the bitch in the room. And bitch means being in total charge of herself. So that's how I approach it. So when somebody says to you, you're a bitch, you go, yeah, well, thank you very much. I am. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes. All right. So now let's switch gears just a teeny bit here. As you know, the title of the podcast is Leadership Purpose. Do you think it's important to have a sense of purpose in your work? And if so, why? If not, why not?
Absolutely. You need a purpose. You need to have a vision of where you think you belong. And that's a big piece too, is where you belong. And again, stepping back into that ownership and authority piece. So the purpose part is very, very important, I believe. I wouldn't do what I'm doing now if I didn't have a purpose. And my purpose is, my mission is to change the world one person at a time. And I get up every day with that intention: change the world one person at a time, with something I have said or done that makes a difference.
Yes. I mean, I love that. I mean, what more do we need to say after that? Okay, well, let's just say one more thing. If there's anything that I didn't ask you about that might be on your heart to share now with people before I tell them how they can get in touch with you, what would that one thing be?
Trust yourself. Trust yourself. I mean, truly, that's the biggest part. And I get the chills even as I say this. And I feel very emotional when I say this. Women need to trust themselves. Don't look for the validation of your existence. Stop making excuses for your existence, but trust yourself to know that you are good enough, that you do have a purpose in life, that you can create and embody and be whatever it is that you choose to be in this world. These are the key issues that we as women, especially high achieving women, need to be certain about. Trust yourself.
Yes, Jacqueline Wales. I mean, that's it. That was a mic drop moment. All right. I'm imagining people are saying, where can I hear more? How can I learn more? How can I get on this path? Where can people connect with you?
They can reach me at my website, JacquelineWales.com. And there's a lot on there, or they can go to my LinkedIn profile. There's also an awful lot on LinkedIn too. And I would be happy to have a chat with anyone who's ready to take their game to the next level. And I have quite a few tools in the toolbox to be able to help do that.
I'm sure you do it. We'll be sure to put those in the show notes. Jacqueline, this has been such a joy and an honor to glean some of your insight and wisdom that you've gained over these years of a very rich and full life, and now doing this work professionally. Really appreciate you being here. Thank you for taking the time out and sharing with us today.
Thank you, Robin. My pleasure.
Okay, everyone. And if you want to know more about me, you can find out more on my website, robinlowens.com. Or if you want to contact me on social media, you can find me primarily on LinkedIn, but I'm on all the sites at Robin L. Owens, PhD. Robin L. Owens, PhD. And if you happen to be an author of a nonfiction book and you've been thinking about how to expand your message beyond the book, and you've been thinking about a course, I can help you do that with my free training at my website, createmasterfulcourses.com, createmasterfulcourses.com. And you can find my free 4-part video training there to help you along your way. And until next time, this is Dr. Robin. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. If you enjoyed it, head on over and rate and subscribe so you never miss an episode. New episodes drop every week, and I can't wait to hang out with you again soon. Meanwhile, this is Dr. Robin signing off. See you next time.